In this presentation, we will discuss the Hungarian hyperinflation of 1946, which was the worst hyperinflation ever, and it is philatelic evidence of an extreme economic disaster. And this is a presentation for the Winnipeg Philatelic Society, Western Canada's oldest stamp club. Now, the presentation describes the spectacular increase in letter postal rates. We will also see the difficulty the Hungarian post office had printing and distributing stamps fast enough to meet the rising rates. And we will see after the reconstruction issue, stamps are almost always printed from the same die, sometimes in different colors, sometimes not, and the rates are almost always overprinted because they're having to issue stamps so fast. We will also see the difficulty had people mailing letters and postal clerks finding the correct rate. This is 1946. We don't have the internet. People other than in Budapest or even in Budapest are going to be advised by telegram of the new rates. And like many European countries, Hungary has many different postal rates. So this was complicated. We sometimes will find covers where the incorrect rate is paid too high or too low, probably because the postal clerk didn't know the correct rate, or perhaps because they could not come up with the stamps to do it. And often letters require many stamps to make up the postage. The closer we get to the end of the hyperinflation, the more likely that is to occur. Now, the stamps shown start with the reconstruction issue of 1945 to 46. During the hyperinflation period of 1946, all the stamps are shown except for parcel and semi-postal stamps, and the stamps immediately after the hyperinflation ended are shown. So we start in what stamp collectors call period 4, which was November the 1st, 1945, which lasted only 15 days. This was the beginning of the reconstruction issue, and this is 15 separately engraved stamps. As you look at them, you'll see it's the same design, but the value has been separately engraved. They're all printed in different colors, but this is effectively the last completely separately engraved stamp that Hungary issued in this period. And so on November the 9th, we start with a 20-pengo stamp in green. Now you will see that the domestic rate was 60-pengo, going up 15 days later to 120-pengo, doubling. There were other stamps that you could have used that had been previously issued to make up the appropriate rate. So period 5, which lasts 2 months, November the 16th, 1945, the domestic rate doubles, and we will see the Hungarian post office issues a number of stamps in a variety of values, not all necessarily in order by value. So November the 16th, 30-pengo, November the 22nd, 500-pengo, which is the foreign letter rate, 2 stamps on November the 30th, December the 1st, 1945, the foreign registered rate of 100-pengo, 300-pengo December the 5th, the foreign postcard, December the 11th, December the 12th, we get 120-pengo, the domestic letter rate. December the 22nd, January the 6th, we have 240-pengo, which is the domestic registered rate, and then 3 stamps on January the 10th. So we note that they don't get around to issuing a domestic letter rate stamp until halfway through the period, and in a little more than a month, that 120-pengo stamp cannot be used because the domestic letter rate is now 600-pengo. So you would have to use a variety of these stamps to come up to 600-pengo. On January the 14th, which is a period that only lasts 17 days, rates go up like 5 times. And to help handle this, they issue overprinted stamps, sometimes overprinted on already overprinted stamps. And the abbreviation in Hungarian actually translates roughly to the English translation I provided here of what it was for. This makes it easier for the postal clerks figuring out a rate. If you had a local postcard, they went, oh, HLP1 paid the 300 Pengo local postcard rate, and that stamp's actually overprinted on an already overprinted stamp. So printed matter, local letter, domestic postcard, domestic letter, and registration stamp. And we see we have the 600 Pengo domestic letter stamp there in the middle at the bottom. So 15 days later, period 7 begins on February the 1st. It lasts about a month. And a second series of overprinted stamps, same 6 rates or postage rates are illustrated, but with 6 different stamps. Again, sometimes printed on already overprinted stamps, but the rates you can see have gone up. The local rate has gone from 400 to 2,000 Pengo, 5 times increase. And we see a month later it goes up 5 times again. But the post office tries pretty hard. We have the overprinted stamps on February the 1st. February the 5th, the last of the reconstruction stamps is issued at 3,000 Pengo, the domestic rate. And then we see 3 and 15 rate stamps. And again, these are printed from the same die in different colors, and the values are overprinted. But it's Pengo, 1,000 Pengo. So it's not 3 Pengo, it's 3,000 and 15,000 Pengo, which are the domestic and foreign letter rates. And then February the 18th, we see the beginning of the postrizer issue. 4 and 15 Pengo. 15 Pengo again is the foreign letter rate. February the 25th, the foreign postcard rate, and February the 27th, 50 Pengo. Here is an interesting cover, I think. It's a bit damaged. It's from, I won't attempt to read the Hungarian, but it's from the National Credit Union Corporation, a Hungarian financial institution, and all the financial institutions collapsed and were reorganized on August the 1st, 1946. This pays the correct 7th period domestic letter rate of 3,000 Pengo, and it's kind of unusual, I think, because it's paid with a single stamp. That often didn't happen later. We get 2 or 4 or many more stamps sometimes. But it was sent from the fuel department in Gyula, which is 235 kilometers southeast of Budapest and near the Romanian border. And the wording up in the top right-hand corner, that there means branch, the Gyula branch of this credit union. So they're obviously moving around financial documents from outlying branches and sending them to Budapest. Period 8 arrives, and we go from 3,000 to 20,000 Pengo. And we have some more post-writer stamps. We have a 20 Pengo, 20,000 Pengo domestic letter stamp on March the 8th, along with a 30 Pengo stamp. And on March the 14th, 80 Pengo, which is the foreign letter rate, which unfortunately for the post office doubles in 2 days. So not a lot of those got used to mail a foreign letter, but they perhaps could have been used as rates went up to make up other rates for other letters. Period 9, 10 to 20 to 40,000 domestic letter doubles, so does the local letter and the foreign letter. The 100 Pengo stamp on March the 18th is the foreign postcard. But we can imagine we see it not quite doubles, up by a third perhaps. So that would have had a very short period of time to be used from the 18th to the 26th, when it again probably got used in combination with other stamps. Period 10, March 26th. Last 6 days, 60,000 Pengo domestic letter rate. Only one stamp is issued, a 200,000 Pengo stamp on March the 27th. Again, same stamp, same die, overprinted value, different color from before. Period 11 goes from 60,000 to 80,000 Pengo. And on April the 5th, we have a 500,000 and 800,000 Pengo stamp issued. I think the Hungarian post office is now contemplating that rates are going to be going up pretty spectacularly, and they'd better get stamps issued ahead of time, because April the 5th, sort of halfway between period 11 and period 12, when again the rates double. So they just were issuing stamps for rates that they thought might occur or might be needed. 160,000 Pengo domestic letter rate. Period 12 lasts for 12 days. And again, goes up a lot in the next period. 8 days later, it goes up 3 times roughly. So 4 days after, on April the 15th, they issue 2 stamps, 160 and 640,000 Pengo stamps, which were the foreign and domestic letter rate for period 12. But took them 4 days, and the postal rate period only lasted 12. So 8 days later, these stamps would not have done as a single stamp what they would have done on April the 11th. Period 13, from 160,000 Pengo to 500,000 Pengo, there were no new stamps issued, and the period only lasted 8 days, from April the 22nd to May the 1st, when rates went up 4 times. So most of the stamps that have been previously issued now, you're going to have a very difficult time putting together the necessary stamps on a letter to make up the various postal rates to mail a letter. Now, here's an example, actually a single stamp. This is our credit union again. The domestic letter rate was 500,000 Pengo from April the 13th to May the 1st, and 750,000 Pengo for over 250 grams. And so we have a rapid increase in rates, and covers are now slightly underpaid, slightly overpaid, or partially paid in cash. And again, the postal clerks are having difficulty figuring out, as you walk into the post office and say, "Hi, I'd like to mail this letter," they can't necessarily figure out the correct rate. And sometimes if the letter was underpaid, there might have been postage due charged on delivery, or it might just have gone through the system. Anyway, this is paid with an 800,000 Pengo stamp, slightly overpaid, but it may be because it's oversized. This is about an 8.5 by 11 cover. Or it could be that there were either 4 or 5 post-rider stamps would have been needed to make up the rate, and maybe they couldn't come up with it. And again, they're sending stuff from a local branch to head office. They note the date it arrived, which was May the 2nd. So perhaps they just decided, well, we'll just pay a bit too much because we need to get the letter mailed off today. So period 14 starts May the 1st, 1946, lasts 9 days from Wednesday till the following Thursday, and the domestic letter rate goes up from 500,000 Pengo to 2 million Pengo. Everything basically doubles. Now, this is very similar to the series of stamps that was issued on January the 14th, 1946, which is not that long ago, January to May, halfway through January to May. That's just not very long. it was 60 pengo, and it's now 2 million pengo, and that's a big increase. The overprints on these are different than in the previous two series, though they're very similar. And they now basically spell out completely in Hungarian what the English translation is. So helyi level pretty closely translates to local letter. And we see the rates are again far larger. 400,000 printed matter, 800,000 local postcard, 1.2 million local letter, and 1.2 million domestic postcard, 2 million domestic letter, and 4 million registration. And the registration is an additional fee. So you would pay the domestic letter rate and the registration rate, and there would be a different foreign registration rate as well. Now, also on May the 1st, we start the Arms of Hungary series at 1 and 4, except if you look down at the bottom, it's millio, or million, so it's 1 million and 4 million. We would have needed 2 of the 1 million stamps to mail a domestic letter, and 2 of the 4 million to mail a foreign letter. So I'm taking it that the post office is kind of guessing as to what the rates might be, and they perhaps might have thought that the rates were going to be 1 and 4 instead of 2 and 8. However, print enough stamps, put enough stamps on the letter, and you can accomplish it. Now, I didn't note this at the beginning of the presentation. We started at 60 pengo, but on May the 1st, 1945, the domestic letter rate was 1 pengo. So in 1 year, it's gone from 1 pengo to 2 million pengo. And you're going to say that's a pretty large increase, and just wait till you see what happens at the end. So now we've got our 10 million pengo domestic letter rate. We are in period 15, March the 10th, lasts for 10 days, Friday to the following Sunday. And so we continue with the Arms of Hungary stamp at 2, 3, 5, and 10 million pengo, the 10 million pengo being the domestic letter rate. And after this time, the number of times that the post office can issue a stamp corresponding to a specific rate becomes much more infrequent. And from this point on, May 1946 until it ends, pretty much almost always you're going to have to use more than one stamp to mail a letter. And here's an example of that. This is in the 15th inflation period. The cover is May the 17th. And it pays the period 15 rate, which is May the 10th through the 19th, of 10 million pengo. But we're using the May the 1st period 14 stamps, which is only 17 days ago. And so we use 2 registration stamps at 4,000 each, that makes 8, and 1 domestic letter stamp, which would have paid the period 14 rate of 2 million. So 8 and 2 is 10. So we get to our 10 million pengo domestic letter rate. So rates have increased 5 times in 9 days and will go up 4 times May the 20th. And while the Arms of Hungary stamp could have been used, either the sender or the post office had difficulty in getting them and used what they can find. Or perhaps they just decided, hey, these stamps aren't going to last much longer, we're going to use them up. And so this is mailed from Skarsgård, which is 163 kilometers south of Budapest. Goes from 10 million to 40 million. 7 days, Monday to Sunday. And these are the last of the Arms of Hungary and the first 2 of the Arms and Posthorn series. May the 20th, which is right on the day the rates change, we have a 20 and a 50 million. Though, again, you're going to have to use more than one stamp and come up with the value somehow or other. And then we have 100 and 200 million Arms and Posthorn on May the 24th, which I think are anticipating the increase on the 27th, because I guess you could have used the 100 million in combination with some of the Arms of Hungary stamps to come up with the foreign letter rate, but 200 million Pengo really isn't required on May the 27th, or May the 24th rather. Goes from 40 million to 120 million. Period 7, May the 27th, 5 days, Monday to Friday. When it goes up just a bit under 4 times, but we have a 500 million Pengo stamp on May the 27th issued. And again, we're just issuing stamps so that future combinations of stamps can be used to pay postal rates. So 500 million Pengo has no particular purpose. Here's an international cover, mailed May 31st, 1946, which was the 17th inflation period. And the foreign rate at that day was 480 million Pengo. So it's the proper use for that day, though it went up the next day. And we use the Arms of Hungary and the Arms and Postorm issue, 5 stamps, to make up the value. And there at the bottom we see this is a foreign letter sent to Cleveland, Ohio. The rate goes from 120 million to 400 million. And on June the 6th, we have 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000 million Pengo stamps issued. And on June the 8th, we have a 10,000 million Pengo stamp, which is 10 billion Pengo. And again, we seem to be anticipating the rate increases because we really don't need these stamps on June the 6th and June the 8th, but by June the 11th, we will need to have these stamps as we're trying to come up with 4 billion Pengo, which would be 2,000 million Pengo stamps. 16 billion Pengo for the foreign letter rate. Goes up to. From 400 million to 4 billion, no stamps are issued. This is period 19, 6 days, Tuesday to Sunday. Goes to 20 billion Pengo. This is period 20, June 17th. It's gone from 4 billion to 20 billion. June the 17th, we issued 20 and 30 billion Pengo stamps, 20 billion being the domestic letter rate. And on June the 18th, we issue the foreign postcard rate, which would have worked from June the 18th to June the 24th. Now, after June the 24th, using any of these stamps would have become difficult. 50 billion stamps would have been needed for a foreign letter. And some people tried. Some people, you will see, there are now the occasional cover that remains with 30 or 40 or 50 stamps plastered on it. Someone really needed to mail a letter, and they used a large number of these stamps. So we are now in period 21, June the 24th, 1946, a period that lasts 7 days, Monday to Sunday. And the domestic letter rate is 400 billion. I'm going to lose my ability to call things billions or trillions shortly. So this is 4 with 11 zeros behind it. And 3 Arms and Posthorn stamps are issued. This is actually technically the first of 2 series. This is in a light green color with a red overprint. Others are different colors. We'll see those later. And 100, 200, and 500 milliard, but milliard is billion. So 100, 200, and 500 billion Pengo. And we will need 2 of the 200 billion Pengo stamp to mail a domestic letter. Now, these are issued 3 days after the rates increased. So somehow or other between June the 24th and June the 27th, we are going to have to find a way to use many, many stamps to come up with our 400 billion. Is that 20 times? So we're going to have to use a lot of stamps to pay the postal rate between June the 24th and June the 27th. But on June the 27th, at least, we will have stamps that we can conveniently use to mail letters. But 3 days later, on July the 1st, it goes up by 100 times to 40 trillion. So these stamps had a very short window in which they could be used. And we're now going to see that the Hungarian post office is having a very difficult time printing stamps to cover the postal rates. They've gone up so quickly. The other thing we have to understand, this is a year after the end of the Second World War. And in the beginning part of the Second World War, Hungary was allied with the Nazis, and most of the fighting took place successfully for Hungary other than in Hungary. But starting in late 44 and for all of 1945, the fighting was in Hungary. The Nazis invaded Hungary. The Russians were closing in from the east. And the damage to Hungary, which had been minimal up until that time, the Russians stole half the railway rolling stock, the Nazis stole the other half, most bridges were destroyed, infrastructure and manufacturing capacity was destroyed. One of the reasons for the Hungarian hyperinflation was the government was deliberately printing lots of money, loaning it to the banks, who were then to loan it to businesses to reestablish Hungarian industry, which, other than the devastation of the hyperinflation, it kind of worked. But we're now in a point where it's very difficult to distribute stamps from Budapest to elsewhere in the country. The railroads and the highways are destroyed. So you can do it, but it's not instantaneous. And we're in an era of rail, and I suppose at the beginning of the Second World War, there was still a lot of horse-drawn transportation. Of course, motorized transportation got going during the Second World War. But it's going to be very difficult in Hungary to distribute stamps. So very difficult on a short notice to get these stamps outside of Budapest, and even distributing within Budapest would have been difficult. So after this time, many covers, particularly foreign covers, were franked without stamps. Just went to the post office, paid whatever the rate was. They said, okay, the rate's paid, and off went your letter, but without stamps. Because it was practically, you were unable to obtain stamps at this time, and particularly in July. 40 trillion. Starting to lose track of the zeros. From 400 billion to 40 trillion. And we issue 4 dozen letter stamps. Now, the period begins July the 1st and ends July the 4th. These stamps are issued July the 3rd, and they're all the same die, and the values are in bilio or trillion. Trillion-Pengo. These stamps were almost immediately obsolete. 8 5 trillion stamps would have been needed to mail a domestic letter. And the next day, it would have been 400 5 trillion stamps would have been needed to mail a domestic letter on July the 4th. So these stamps are available mint, but to find them on a cover, they probably couldn't have been used. They were really only available for a day, and probably only for a day in Budapest, because they probably didn't get that far away from Budapest at the time. July the 5th, a domestic letter would have needed 120 billion stamps, because the rate went to 200 trillion. So these were effectively, issued on July the 5th, were effectively obsolete on issue, because we've gone from 40 trillion to 2,000 trillion. And again, this period is only going to last 4 days, Thursday through Sunday. On July the 7th, again, the day before the rates go up, we have 50, 100, 200, and 500 billion stamps. But the rates go up 50 times on July the 8th, the day after. These also would have had a difficult time being used. Period 24, July the 8th, 4 days again, Monday through Thursday. That's a big number. 100,000 trillion pengo. 10 to the 17 zeros. 1 times 10 to the 17th. So on July the 10th, 2 days into this period, they issue 1,000 trillion stamps. And given that you need 100,000 trillion to mail a letter, you would have needed 100 of these. So they had no practical use. And on July the 10th, they issue a 100,000 trillion stamp, which is the domestic letter rate for the next 2 days, after which it also would have been effectively unusable. We now go to Pengo. And I'm quoting at the top the rate in Pengo at the beginning of the period and 6 days later at the end of the period, because the Pengo inflated and the Pengo inflated, the number of Pengo to the Pengo also inflated. So 3.2 to 10 to the 19th on July the 12th to 2.4 times 10 to the 22nd on July the 17th. Is that a 3,000 time increase? The Pengo increase isn't that bad, but the Pengo to the Pengo increase is becoming spectacular. So the final 3 dove and letter stamps were issued July the 13th, a day after the rates went up, and they have no practical use. They cannot be found postally used on cover, and by this time, July the 13th, all previously issued stamps are withdrawn, including these dove and letter stamps which were issued on July the 13th. So they were issued and withdrawn the same day, having no practical use. Now also in period 25, we introduce 4, and these are interesting because they are 4 separately engraved stamps, though the values are overprinted. So perhaps the post office had these in process and thought, well, maybe hyperinflation is over, so why don't we issue these 4 stamps at 10, 20, 30, and 40,000 Pengo, the 10 and the 20 being the local and domestic letter rate. However, what happened, they only issued like 90,000 of these stamps each, and most were bought by collectors. So any of these on cover are probably philatelic and not postal use, because collectors gobbled them all up. But we've gone to 20,000 Pengo, and we're about to go to 100,000 Pengo 6 days later, a 5 times increase in 6 days. Still in this rate period, though, we start with the post horn and arms stamp, which were issued on July the 16th, 4 days into the period, and 2 days before the rates went up 5 times, in 5 Ezer Pengo and 10 Ezer Pengo. So the 10 Ezer Pengo is the local letter rate, and you would have had to use 2 of them to mail a domestic letter, and 8 of them to mail a foreign letter. 2 more were issued on July the 17th, the day before the rates went up, in 20 and 50,000 Pengo rates, and presumably they're anticipating the rate change the next day, because 2 of the 50 Ezer Pengo would have paid the domestic rate, 1 of them would have paid the local rate. And period 25 lasted 6 days, Friday to Wednesday. Still going up, and again, the rate in Pengo on the first day and the last day, 6 days later. 3.6 times 10 to the 22nd and 5 times 10 to the 24th. It's 100,000 times? Don't know. It's a lot. More like 1,000. Rates go from 2,000 out of Pengo to 100,000 out of Pengo. On July the 19th, we have 100,000 Ezer out of Pengo, which is the domestic letter rate. And on July the 20th and 23rd, 200,000 and 500,000 Ezer, or 500 Ezer, 500,000 out of Pengo. So again, they seem to be trying to anticipate rates, and they do manage to print stamps that pay a particular rate at the time. Final period, period 27, July the 14th, July the 24th till August the 1st, 6 days, Wednesday to Wednesday. 4.8 times 10 to the 25th and 8 times 10 to the 26th. That's a lot of zeros. I don't know how many million, billion that is. It's a lot. 100 to 400, or 100,000 to 400,000 at Pengo. And on July the 26th, which is not a long time before this all stops, we issue 1 million and 5 million at Pengo stamps. Now, most of the stamps issued before period 15 May the 10th were withdrawn on June 30th. Stamps issued before July the 8th and all the stamps issued on July the 13th were withdrawn on July the 13th. All remaining stamps were withdrawn July 31st. And even if not withdrawn, all the stamps were unusable because as they introduced the new currency, the forint, the rate of exchange between the forint and the Pengo increased again, and to mail a domestic letter August the 1st, 245 million Pengo stamps would have been needed. You never would have fitted them on the letter. So all of the stamps of the hyperinflation period A were withdrawn and couldn't be postally used after the 1st of August, and B, even if you'd tried, you couldn't have fit enough of them on the letter to make it work. So the hyperinflation period ends August the 1st, 1946. There are a large number of factors that affected this, but the stamps that were issued are the Industry and Agriculture series. And they were issued on 3 separate days starting on August the 1st. Local letter rate is 30 filler. There are 100 filler in a forint. And the domestic letter rate is 6 forint. And on August the 1st, we see 8, 20, 30, and 60 filler and 1 forint stamps issued. So if you wanted to mail a domestic letter on August the 1st, you would have needed 6 1 forint stamps because that was all that was available. So you're still going to be in the situation that many stamps potentially had to be used to pay a letter. Now, we do have a 30 filler stamp, so you can mail a local letter, but they just haven't got enough stamps. Now, these are also printed from the same die and with values overprinted. On August the 6th, we have 12 and 40 filler and 5 forint stamps issued. So the domestic letter rate can now be paid with a 5 and a 1 forint stamp. And by August the 14th, we have a 30 filler and 10 forint stamp. But we're still going to have to make up the domestic letter rate with 2 stamps, and that wouldn't be adjusted until 1947. So the hyperinflation is over. These are the stamps that are used. And inflation in Hungary since this time hasn't been that bad. They solved the problem and have not had hyperinflation since. So is it a good idea to fight inflation? Is 6% annual inflation really that bad? In Hungary in 1946, it topped out around 21% daily. Prices doubled in 15 hours. you had to basically spend your money immediately or you got nothing for it. If you said, oh, I'll go buy that tomorrow, it would have gone up in price 4 times and your wheelbarrow full of money wouldn't have worked. Now, just a quick comment on the covers I've used in this exhibit. Now, my view is each of them is interesting, and each of them in their own way shows and illustrates the difficulty in franking a letter, the difficulty in coming up with the stamps to mail a letter in Hungary in the first 7 months of 1946. Now, none of the covers I have are expensive. They're a couple of bucks each. But I still find them interesting. Some of my stamp collecting colleagues conflate expensiveness with interest. And the more expensive an item is, the more interesting they think it is. And accordingly, they would have a bias and think that the covers I have shown are not interesting. I disagree, but never mind. Some covers exist with much more extreme franking, 30 or 40 stamps to mail a letter. I've mentioned that such covers exist, and we've done the math to see that if you really, really had to mail a letter, you might have had to have done that. Now, those covers cost $500 or more, and other than the fact that I'm not going to spend that much money, I can't be sure that those covers aren't philatelic. In other words, someone who was reasonably well off and a stamp collector in Hungary said, you know what, these stamps are only going to be used for a couple of days. I'm going to mail a letter to my friend in Switzerland and ask him to hang on to it and give it back to me because it will be a very unique philatelic item. Now, the thing that's also true about those covers is there just could not have been that many of them, because the ability to get the money in the month of July to mail a letter and to use the stamps that were available in July, you would have had to have really, really needed to mail the letter, or you would have had to have a bunch of money, and the possibility that you were doing it just to create a philatelic item cannot be dismissed and can't be proven or not proven. I've also seen covers that are canceled in 1947 with a whole array of stamps from January 1946 all the way up to the 5 million Billion-Pengo stamp from July of 1946. Those covers are obviously impossible or obviously created afterwards. So you have to be very careful about these covers. And I guess my point is that you can create, in my view, an interesting exhibit or presentation without spending a whole bunch of money on it. The stamps, the individual stamps shown in this exhibit cost me probably no more than $20. And I find them very interesting. I find, for instance, the last 3 Devon letter stamps that could not possibly have been used and were withdrawn on their day of issue. I find those really interesting, even though they were never philatelically used, because it demonstrates the 3 things that I was trying to do at the beginning. Show the difficulty that the post office had in coming up with the stamps, and the difficulty that people mailing letters had in finding the right rate and putting it on an envelope. And I've done it, I think, without spending a whole bunch of money on it, and I find it interesting. Though I think if I were to try to turn this into a gold medal winning exhibit, I would have to spend $3,000 to $5,000 on covers to buy my gold medal. Anyway, so thanks for listening.